So just to give you a brief overview about my background, I am a lawyer by training. I study human rights law in the Netherlands, but now I'm working in advocacy work for EEPA, which stands for Europe External Policy Advisors. We are based in Brussels, together with Professor van Rijssen, who unfortunately could not be here today and deliver her presentation. So I am a substitution for her. I'm sure that I cannot do the justice to that, but in this short presentation I try to highlight at least some activities and very concrete events that have been recently initiated in Brussels and which were triggered by the newest development in the Horn of Africa, and especially also by the cooperation attempts coming from the European Union towards Eritrea. I chose a highlight or a name for my presentation as "There is no peace without people," which I believe that also this conference is really carrying this message, and we could observe it in every presentation in these past 2 days. So to start with, I would like to give a little bit of background what activities has been organized in the recent past. Since the peace agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the European Union has attempted fresh engagement with the Eritrean regime in order to stop migration. However, in this process, they have not engaged with the people of Eritrea. The 11th European Development Funding of €200 million, for which an agreement was signed in 2016, did not deliver any projects, as the Eritrean government has so far refused to sign any funding agreements. The EU, meanwhile, does not have insight in what's the situation in Eritrea, nor does it have any insight into the peace agreement process from either Eritrean side or Ethiopian side. The European Union is lacking a head of delegation, and therefore they do not have the frequent contact that they would like to have. As a result of this, the EU chose another road to approach the regime. The European Commission recently announced that it is funding a €20 million project in Eritrea to build roads in between Massawa and the Ethiopian border through the European Union Emergency Trust Fund for Africa. That is the fund's main aim. The main aim of this fund is to address migration crisis. To agree on this project, International Cooperation and Development Commissioner Neven Mimica has discussed and agreed directly with the Eritrean government to start this project in the country. The European Union freely admits in its project FISH that national service recruits will be used for building the roads. As this project description quotes, the labor used by the construction companies will consist of 3 types of personnel: permanent government professionals, those in national service, and those mobilized from the local community on a cash-for-work basis. End of quote. And also, they quote, "The costs associated with the actual delivery of the rehabilitation work by the construction companies, including labor costs, will be paid for solely by the government." End of quote. The Red Sea Trading Corporation will be organizing procurement assisted by UN OPS, the United Nations Office for Project Services. Based on these developments, in April 2019, this month, at the beginning of this month, the Foundation Human Rights for Eritreans, a Netherlands-based organization of exiled Eritreans, issued a letter of summons to the European Union to seize this project immediately. During a press conference that was held in Brussels, the representatives of the foundation and its representing lawyer explained the essential of the case, in which our organization, EPA, was an observer. The main objective of the legal action is to prevent the European Union from financing activities in Eritrea for which forced labor is used. As the letter of summons quotes, "Forced labor will be used in the course of a project which is being financed by the European Union. Shockingly, the EU is clearly aware of this and accepts it. The the Emergency Trust Fund for Africa accepts that there will be no short-term reforms to the national service. End of quote. This is a clear violation of human rights and the EU's adherence to international legal obligations. The letter of summons also states that, I quote, "The Red Sea Trading Corporation has been found to engage in the illegal trade of arms in violations of sanctions applicable at that time. The fact the European Union willingly and unconditionally pays significant sums of money to such companies is stunning and in violation of the legal obligation of the European Union to strengthen human rights." End of quote. The description and aims of this project shows that the attempts of the European Union to reduce migration from Eritrea is actually achieving the opposite. I myself returned from Ethiopia, from Tigray last month in March, where I also had the chance to speak with the officials of ARA, the agency that has a mandate over the refugees. And I believe it was Dan who mentioned this yesterday, but I am going to repeat it to make my point. That the officials that I spoke to confirmed that around 300 people per day continue to cross the borders and are being registered as refugees. Most of them, or significant number of them, are unaccompanied minors, and they said that around 20 to 25% of these are national service recruits. The European Union is therefore supporting one of the main factors that continues to drive migration, and therefore human trafficking in countries such as Libya and Sudan. Meanwhile, Eritrea has taken the chair of Khartoum process, despite the evidence of Eritrean authorities' involvement in human trafficking. The Eritrean diaspora and other organizations have challenged the involvement of the European Union and its member states with the Eritrean regime and other regimes accused of human rights abuses in recent months. Increasingly, these challenges are taking the form of legal action, as I just described. Another example is coming from the UK, where the Department for International Development is being sued for its support to Libya detention centers by an Ethiopian asylum seeker. In addition, the Eritrean regime in the diaspora is also challenged, for example, in the Netherlands, where last year the head of the embassy office was expelled following the media and reporting on intimidation and threats around the 2% tax. It appears, therefore, that rather than just reporting extensively on these issues, legal measures and challenges are the way forward when it comes to the EU's involvement in external action in the Horn of Africa, as well as Eritrea's involvement in Europe through the long arm of the Eritrean regime. Other events in Brussels in the past months have spotlighted the situation in Eritrea and for Eritrean refugees. For example, the conference that was mentioned earlier today, with title "We the People, Peace in the Horn, the Safety and the Future of Eritrean People," organized in Brussels in December last year, brought together over 200 participants from Eritrean diaspora, experts, NGOs, human rights activists, and politicians. The main objective of the conference was to provide a platform for different stakeholders to share, exchange, and learn on the new reality of the peace agreement between Ethiopia and Eritrea and the situation of human rights for people from Eritrea that are in the country, that are on migration routes, but also in the diaspora. The conference coincided with the EU summit, which that time discussed a multi-annual financial package for migration. One of the main outcomes of this conference was a declaration and its submission to the European Union. The declaration strongly condemned the continued lack of improvements in Eritrea, the involvement of officials in trafficking network, the torture involved in human trafficking, and the policies with which the EU is trying to tackle the problem under the Khartoum process. The statement urgently called upon the European Union and African Union, as well as international community, to, among other things, seek reforms in Eritrea. That includes ending the indefinite national service, unconditionally freeing all political prisoners, and implementing the constitution so that Eritrean refugees can safely return to their homeland. The statement was delivered to the External Action Service of the EU for delivery to the High Representative of the European Union, Federica Mogherini. There were also other activities organized from human rights activists in Brussels, and one of the examples is the demonstration that was held in front of the European Commission building, where the European Council was rounding up its meeting on the EU budget, during which migration was a topic for discussion. The demonstration asked the EU to stop giving money to governments accused of severe human rights abuses and aiding human trafficking, such as the regime of Eritrea, Sudan, and Libyan Coast Guard. In April, on the 1st of April 2019, a roundtable was held in the European Parliament with the title Inhuman Treatment and Trafficking of People in Libya, EU and EU Member State Responsibility. This event was hosted by members of the European Parliament together with EPA. Speakers in this event were, among others, representatives from Doctors Without Borders, thank you, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, but also human rights activists, journalists, and other legal experts. All panelists mentioned and attested to the horrific living and detention conditions of refugees in Libya. Eritrean human rights activist Abraham Tesfaye, whose name was mentioned earlier today, listed known deaths of Eritrean refugees in Libya in a shocking testimony. It showed how many migrants and refugees are dying in official and unofficial detention centers because of untreated infection, malnutrition, mistreatment, machine guns, or even because they commit suicide. Finally, human rights activists and defenders based in Italy and Germany are currently organizing a cycling event and demonstration on 6 May in Brussels in order to follow up on advocacy campaign which aims to stop EU financing of the Libyan Coast Guards and demands the release and evacuation to Europe of refugees from the detention centers immediately, and the overall increased protection of human rights of refugees and migrants in the country. So these are very concrete actions that has been happening in Brussels or in the Netherlands in the past months. And this initiative shows that the people are really hungry for peace and that people are really, in whatever form, showing that they had enough. They are keen to push for justice, they are keen to push for democracy and increased protection of Eritreans in Eritrea, on migration roads, but also in the diaspora. And I would like to thank you with this.
Thank you, Kristina.